If I can start it, there we go. This morning we began looking at the dangers of evil companions. And if this week has shown us anything besides just the sinfulness and ugliness of the world, it is the fact that there are a lot of evil people out there. We were talking this afternoon, and I used to have a policy that I didn't unfriend anybody. I just unfollowed them so I didn't see them. I said, after this, if they post something taking joy in this murder or any of them, that's it. They're gone. I don't want to be associated with that. And our companionship with evil has lasting effects. And when we looked at the example of Jehoshaphat, he was a good king. That's what the scriptures described him as. He was working to turn Israel back to God, to tear down the idols that his previous kings had put up, and he was working to teach them the law. Well, his problem was his companionship. He made an alliance with King Ahab of Israel. King Ahab was evil. There is no other way to put it. He was one of the worst kings that Israel had in terms of his wickedness, and mainly because he was influenced by his wife Jezebel. So Jehoshaphat decided to go into war with Ahab without consulting God first, and when he finally consulted the seer here in 2 Chronicles chapter 19, after he had looked for a prophet, and he went to him and he received some news through him from the Lord that was not pleasing. The end of that verse, the wrath of the Lord is upon you. So here is where we see the wheels fall apart, where the wrath of the Lord is upon Jehoshaphat for his evil companionship, because he was a good person. But it started to have the effects on the rest of the kingdom. We see after that Jehoshaphat left, Jehoram became king. And Jehoram reigned for 8 years there in 2 Chronicles chapter 21, beginning in verse 4. He reigned for 8 years. Beginning in verse 4 here, it says, now when Jehoram was established over the kingdom of his father, that would be Jehoshaphat, he strengthened himself and killed all his brothers with the sword, and also others of the prince of Israel. Jehoram was 32 years old when he became king, and he reigned 8 years in Jerusalem. So the first thing he does is eliminate any possible competition to the throne, killing his brothers. And we see how this shift back to evil because of this relationship that Jehoshaphat made with Ahab. And Jehoram started walking in the ways of the kings of Israel, just as Ahab was doing. And why wouldn't he? Because now they're connected. Because his father's Jehoshaphat's decision to tie the family together. He walked in the sinful ways. And look at who it was influenced by. Just as Jezebel did there in 2 Chronicles 21 and verse 6, Jezebel influenced Ahab to do what was evil. Well, she was having her influence over Jehoram as well. Beginning in verse 6 here, and he walked in the way of the kings of Israel, just as the house of Ahab had done, for he had the daughter of Ahab as a wife, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord. Who do you think her mother was? Ahab was married to Jezebel. She influenced her daughter influenced him, and this again ties it right back to that companionship that Jehoshaphat had with Ahab and that decision to tie the nations together. Subjects begin to revolt against paying tribute to King Jehoram, and when you read in 2 Chronicles chapter 21 and verse 11, we see that he starts bringing those idols back into Jerusalem, making the Israel or Judah commit fornication against God. All that Jehoshaphat had done, and now look at the ramifications of that one decision. beginning in 2 Chronicles 21 and verse 11. Moreover, he made high places in the mountains of Judah and caused the inhabitants of Jerusalem to commit harlotry and led Judah astray. He was living just like the kings of Israel in sin. A lesson here could be made: just because everybody else is doing it doesn't make it right. Well, Israel had been in sin for many generations. Judah had been on and off serving the Lord. Jehoshaphat had done his best to bring them back to serving the Lord. But because of that decision, because of that influence from Israel, they started to go back. It didn't make it right because everybody else was doing it, did it? The world can tell us how wrong we are because we're not celebrating whatever sin they're promoting with them. They can tell us that we're not being inclusive or welcoming or whatever they try to tell us, and then they're conditioning us not to speak out against these sins. And now look at where we're at. Before it was, if you just leave us alone and let us do them, we're going to be fine. Now that's not the case. Now it's you have to be supporting us or you're against us. We cannot take an attitude towards sin that it's okay. Whatever the sin is, just because the world accepts it does not mean that God is going to. And God sent Elijah and warned King Jehoram that he was going to be punished and struck with plagues in 2 Chronicles 21 verses 14. Well, not 14 through 14, just 21 verse 14. Behold, the Lord will strike your people with a serious affliction, your children, your wives, and all your possessions. Jehoram was going to be struck with sickness. He was going to be punished. And when he died, nobody even bothered mourning his death because he was that kind of a king. In 19 there in 2 Chronicles 21, then it happened in the course of time after the end of 2 years that his intestines came out because of his sickness. So he died in severe pain, and his people made no burning for him, like the burning for his fathers. He was 32 years old when he became king. He reigned in Jerusalem 8 years, and to no one's sorrow departed. However, they buried him in the city of David, but not in the tombs of the kings. He didn't even get a king's burial. He was buried in the city of David, but no one was there to mourn him. No one was in sorrow because of the king that he was. Do we think, when we look at the leaders of our country and how things are going, do you think that we're really secure? Do we think that nothing could possibly happen to our security and our blessed way of life? If we look at how we're living, do we get complacent in feeling that way? What we have experienced in the last week, other nations experience on a daily basis and have for decades. And there are Christians all over the world that are trying to worship and serve God under those conditions. Here in Judah, when the decision was made by Jehoshaphat to align himself with someone evil, King Ahab, that's when their problems started happening. After Jehoram's death, we have King, and I apologize, I'm going to probably not say these names right, Ahaziah, in 2 Chronicles chapter 22, and he comes into power, and if it's possible, he was worse than his father was. He came in verse 1 here, then the inhabitants of Jerusalem made Ahaziah, his youngest son, king in his place, for the raiders who came with the Arabians into camp had killed all the older sons. So Ahaziah, the son of Jehoram, king of Judah, reigned. Ahaziah was 42 years old when he became king, and he reigned 1 year in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Athaliah, the granddaughter of Omir. He also walked in the ways of the house of Ahab, for his mother advised him to do wickedly. And again, where did his mother come from? Who was his mother? Well, she was connected to King Ahab. She would have been his daughter if my genealogy is correct. So a horrible leader comes in and yet again being influenced by the house of Ahab. And notice who's pulling the strings here in verse 20, chapter 22, verses 3 and 4. His mother advised him to do wickedly. The influence that his mother did with her son is exactly what she did with her husband. And it is to do wickedness in the sight of the Lord. He not only took counsel from her, but also from his father-in-law's house, or his in-law's house, with the house of Ahab. A real good example to seek advice from, isn't it? One that was always doing evil in the sight of the Lord. And he was killed by the one who was anointed by the Lord and was killed to cut off the house of Ahab. Look at this evil alliance and the problems that it created and brought to the kingdom of Judah. And yet we think that our companionship with those in the world will have no influence or impact on us. It all started with that one marriage because for whatever reason, Jehoshaphat made a friend or wanted to have friendship with Ahab and the kingdom of Israel. So the spiral is happening, and then we see Athaliah. She becomes queen of Israel in 2 Chronicles chapter 22. And she assumes power. Her husband had reigned and died. Her son reigned and now he's dead. So she thinks it's her turn to take control. That sounds kind of like some of our politicians today, doesn't it? Well, you wait your turn and then you can have power. Well, Athaliah, the evil wife and mother who'd had influence over the other kings, now she is the one that assumes the throne, and she reigns for 6 years. And she was such a wonderful queen that her first act was to kill all the rightful heirs to the throne to secure her reign. Her grandchildren is who this would have been. That was her first thing. She's so wicked and so hungry for power that she's going to kill the ones who are below her so they can't assume the throne. But one was hidden from her. Her grandson Joash, he was hidden. 2 Chronicles chapter 22 in verse 11. And he was hidden until he was 7 years old. And then he became king. And don't worry, I'm not going to read chapter 23 and 24, but for reference, that's where he was talked about. He took, with help, became the rightful heir to the throne. Beginning in chapter 23 and in verse 12, the turmoil is happening. They have revealed that, in setting up some context of this reading, they've revealed that Joash was still alive, that he is the rightful heir to the throne, not Athaliah, who'd killed everybody else to make sure she kept it. And beginning in chapter 23 and verse 12, now Athaliah heard the noise of the people running and praising the king. She came to the people in the temple of the Lord. When she looked, there was the king standing by his pillar at the entrance, and the leaders and the trumpeters were by the king. All the people of the land were rejoicing and blowing trumpets, also the singers with musical instruments, and those who led in praise. So Athaliah tore her clothes and said, "Treason, treason." And Jehoiada the priest brought out the captains of hundreds who were set over the army and said to them, "Take her outside under guard and slay with the sword whoever follows her." For the priest said, "Do not kill her in the house of the Lord." So they seized her, and she went by the way of the entrance of the horse gate into the king's house, and they killed her there. She was the one that had committed treason, and she was the one who had been an evil influence over her husband and over her sons. And then well, she just was like many people today, didn't want to be held accountable for her actions in life. But Joash comes into power. And I'm trying to go quickly through this because we have several pages and I don't want to preach on this all evening. But when Joash comes into power, now we know that a 7-year-old boy would not be capable of running a kingdom without help, but he has the mentorship of priest Jehoiada, or however you say it, Jehoiada. And while Jehoiada was giving Joash advice and he was under his guidance, he did what was right in the sight of the Lord as long as he had him to mentor him. Here we can see the power of a good influence. In 2 Chronicles 24 and verse 4, Joash did what was right in the sight of the Lord all the days of Jehoiada the priest. In chapter 24, we can read about Joash working to restore the kingdom back to where I forgot his name now. The king, the one we started with, where he had with them following God before the evil kings started rebuilding the idols to the altars, to the unknown gods, to the committing adultery, harlotry on the Lord God. So Joash works, but to restore that back to God. But when Jehoiada died, Joash started listening to the advice of others. The faithfulness to God ended with Jehoiada. And he's again showing the power of those evil influences. 2 Chronicles chapter 24, beginning in verse 17. Now, after the death of Jehoiada, the leaders of Judah came and bowed down to the king, and the king listened to them. Therefore, they left the house of the Lord God of their fathers and served wooden images and idols, and wrath came upon Judah and Jerusalem because of their trespass. And ultimately, this led to a violent end when Joash was assassinated because of his disobedience, and he was killed by the Syrian armies there in chapter 24 and verse 24. So, yes, the wrath of God fell Jehoshaphat. That's the one I meant to, that I couldn't find. It fell upon Jehoshaphat through his family. It didn't necessarily come in his lifetime, but like the sword was never going to depart from the house of David, all this was brought about because of the evil influence that came over his companionship and the alliance that he made with Ahab. All this turmoil brought about. Now, we're not under the Old Testament today, but we can use it for our guidance and for our help, and we're warned. We are warned in the New Testament about evil companionship. 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and in verse 33 tells us that. And there are different translations that are worded with emphasis on some different words and change that make it an interesting verse to look at. In the King James Version, do not be deceived. Evil communications corrupt good manners. From 1611. It still makes sense, but not as clear as it could be in some of the other translations. The English Standard Version says, do not be deceived. Bad company ruins good morals. A little more concise here in our moral character. We think of manners. Verse from the King James Version, your manners, your please and your thank yous. That's not what it's talking about. It's our spiritual morals. And evil company, bad company, it destroys those morals. The perfect example are the kings that we looked at in the Old Testament. They were destroyed by their evil companionship. In the New International Version, and definitely not my favorite translation of the scriptures, but it says, do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. Again, that character, who we are inside, the importance of good character. We see plenty examples of bad character. We have seen people reveal their true character on social medias, and we need to be taking note of that to see what kind of person they are. And remember that if they are the ones that are our close companions, not the one, we can't control who we work with or who we live next door to or pass in the store. That's not the kind of companionship that we're being warned about here. It's those that are closest to us, the ones that have a greater influence over us. It starts with these translations start with a warning. Don't be deceived. Don't be misled. This is going to happen. The American Standard Version, evil companionship corrupt good morals. And this translation matches up with our lesson perfectly. The companionship, this deeper relationship that they had with Ahab, and that how it affected them. The one that was trying to do, Jehoshaphat was trying his best to convert the kingdom back to God, to teach the way, going back to the book of the law to teach them. And then his companionship with Ahab takes it off the rails. Someone who is a companion is not just a mere acquaintance. And the scriptures are telling us, don't be deceived by that. Don't think that you're going to be the exception to this rule, because you will be affected by this. It will erode your morality slowly but surely. It will wear away your good character. And it's going to happen in a way where we won't even notice it's happening until it's too late. That's what we're being warned about. Don't be deceived. That's why it comes with a warning sign. So let's look at some of the scriptures that warn us of evil companionship. Those who think we're too strong and mature are not immune to being corrupted. Proverbs chapter 13 and verse 20. He who walks with wise men will be wise, but the companion of fools will be destroyed. If you want to be wise, well, then associate with wise people. If you want to be morally upright and righteous, then associate with morally upright and righteous people. And again, we're not talking about those that are acquaintances, those that we can't help who we're associating with. We're talking about those that we choose to be with. We're given another warning. Do not be deceived. We invest our time in people, just like that farmer who plants his seed in the field and invests his time with that. And the Bible tells us we are going to reap what we sow. Whatever we plant, that's what harvest is going to come in the fall. And if our companionship is with sinful people, people who Christians should not be associating with, it's going to rub off on us. God will not allow us to mock him. In Galatians chapter 6, beginning in verse 7, do not be deceived, God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. For he who sows to his flesh will of the flesh reap corruption, but he who sows to the Spirit will of the Spirit reap everlasting life. When we choose to purposely spend our time with ungodly people, it's going to have an effect on us. There's no other way around it. If we think that we can associate with those that would never darken the doorway of a church building and have those as our closest companions and our advisors, then what kind of advice are we going to expect when we go to them? It's going to be worldly advice, something that's kept them from obeying all this time, and they will influence us and keep us from obeying as well. Remember what Paul said in 2 Corinthians chapter 6 and beginning in verse 14. Do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship has righteousness with lawlessness? And what communion has light with darkness? And what accord has Christ with Belial? Or what part has a believer with an unbeliever? And what agreement has the temple of God with idols? Well, what agreement did it have with Jehoshaphat and Ahab? It didn't have a good one, did it? And if this yoke together, none of us would probably remember this or know this from our lifetime, because none of us that I know were farmers on a farm like this. But that yoke is referring to the oxen that they tie them together with. And if we have two that are unequally yoked, one is really strong and one's really weak, well, that strong one's going to pull the weaker one all over the place. Christians, don't put yourself in that partnership with those who do not believe, because they're going to pull you all over the place. If the believer is stronger, it might work out, but are we really going to take that chance? Jehoshaphat was strong. He was leading the kingdom towards righteousness. Then he got involved with Ahab. Ahab got him to make a commitment to go to war with him. He agreed to do so without even consulting God, and then found out what a mess he'd made. When we're yoking ourselves with those that are unbelievers and tying ourselves to them, and once we're hitched, it's going to be too late to get out. And I would say this could be applied to any type of a partnership as a Christian, yoking us together, tying us together. The danger is real. And the unbeliever, if we think about it just from a physics standpoint, if we're trying to live a higher calling and the believer is on the ground, it's easier for someone to pull me off of here from the floor than it is for me to lift them up here. That's physics. And that's the same that we would be facing here. The unbeliever can easily pull me down quicker than I can pull them up. And we have examples of this throughout the scriptures. So why? Why then? Our final point, or final points, but why do God's people choose evil companions? Why would we pick them? Well, we're in the minority, so we don't have much of a choice, right? But it's in part because we ignore the warnings of God. We're given these warnings. There are ample warnings in the Old and New Testament about deciding who are our closest companions. And when we choose the evil over the good, then we're ignoring the warnings that God has given us. Jehoshaphat did not seek God's counsel until it was too late. He'd already made the alliance. Then, well, let's see what the seer has to say. And it didn't stop him, did it? He went right on going. Knowing that it was wrong, he still did not stop. Some might believe that I'm so strong that I don't have to worry about anything. I am so strong. I'll be the influence over the non-believer. Well, that's my pride talking. And we can have a multiple lessons on pride and what it does to us and how we let our pride get us in trouble. Proverbs chapter 16 and verse 18. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. When I start thinking that I am the strong one, that nothing is going to bring me down, that I can't fall, well, guess what? There's a fall in my near future. And I'm going to hit the ground hard, because the Bible has given me plenty of warnings about that. We have ample to see that this is the case. We'll go through these quickly, but we have the example of Samson. Who could be stronger than Samson? I mean, he was the epitome of strength. And what happened to him? Well, he was led away by a woman, wasn't he? She had an influence over him. He went out and he found him a wife of the Philistines, and Delilah, and she influenced him, caused him to, what was his one stipulation? You're going to have this strength as long as you don't cut your hair. Well, cut my hair. Where's your strength from? And finally he gave in, and he told her where his strength lies. She gets him to go to sleep. She ties him up, gets his hair cut, and then guess what? He doesn't have the strength anymore. And he fell away because of that. He was Samson. Well, not only the strongest man, but the wisest man. His love for foreign wives turned his heart away from God. The wisest man to ever live was, and maybe it was just sheer volume because he had so many women, but he was turned away by women. The man who had more wisdom, who was arrayed greater than anyone that had ever lived because of God, was turned away. In what we read, if we look at secular history, what he did to his children when they were sacrificing to the god Moloch, and all of the gods that he worshiped because of those women. The wisest man on earth. And yet I'm going to be the strong one. I'm going to be the one that's going to resist all of these evil influences because I am so strong. I think I'm only fooling myself. We also look at the physical aspect, maybe not just physical beauty, but the physical, like Jehoshaphat looked at. He made this alliance with Ahab. Maybe it was because they were a neighboring kingdom and threatening him. They were much larger than Judah. It could have been to keep political peace. Maybe it was for some of the money that he had later. And this could be us. Well, how about Lot? Lot is described as a righteous man. That's what the scriptures call him. But what happened? He looked to the sinful city of Sodom and Gomorrah because that was the well-watered plains. That's where my flocks and my herds can get the most nourishment. That's the best piece of land, and that's where I'm going to go. And look at all that happened to him. He was a righteous man. The scriptures tell us that what went on around him vexed his soul. But he moved his family there, and they paid dearly for that. How many of them escaped? Of all of his family that was there, it was Lot and 2 of his daughters. His wife didn't even escape the city with him because she looked back. And she turned into a pillar of salt. That is sinful influence. Some choose evil influence because we have separated ourselves from the Lord, figuratively or literally. We have Peter, his example of denying the Lord. I will not deny you. I will die for you. That's what he said, but he followed him afar off. In Luke chapter 22 and verse 54. He didn't stay near the Lord, did he? No, he kept getting further and further away. In verse 55, they kindled a fire in the midst of the courtyard and sat down together. Peter sat among them. Well, Jesus is inside. Peter is in the courtyard. He kept his distance. That's what verse 54 tells us. He followed, but he kept his distance. And then he ended up denying the Lord 3 times. And he realized what he had done, and he went out and he wept bitterly. But he separated himself from the Lord. We can find ourselves warming up by the fire of the unbeliever. They started asking Peter about his relationship with the Lord. We can tell that you're part of him. We can tell. Because your speech sounds like him. No, that's not me. And by the end of that, he was cursing and swearing, saying that he did not know Jesus. Just a little while before that, he was saying, I will die for you. No, he was influenced because he didn't stay close to God. So let's conclude with this question. What about us today? As we stand in the face of potential persecution, or fear from man coming in here and killing us because of our faith, because we're saying something that they don't like. Are we going to warm ourselves by the enemy's fire? Are we going to join and make an alliance with the evilness of this world out of fear and tie ourselves to them? Or are we going to continue to stand for the cause of Christ? I hope that if it means standing for Christ or losing our life, I hope that we pick standing for Christ. Because the price is our eternal home in heaven if we don't. Because he says, if you deny me before men, I'll deny you before my Father who is in heaven. So I hope that none of us ever have to make that decision. But if we do, I hope we always choose the Lord. That's the danger of evil companionship. It weakens us to the point where, well, maybe I don't have to do that. Maybe there's a way around it. Maybe I can do this. And the companionship has the influence over us, just like Jehoshaphat. And those that his children and grandchildren, and look at all that happened from someone that was a good king, described as a good king, but we don't go back and we don't look at him as one of the good kings of Judah, do we? No, we think about David and maybe Solomon, and some of the others, but we don't really see him, do we? Because he was so heavily influenced by Ahab and the decisions that continued after that for 3 and 4 generations, to the point of his children or grandchildren and great grandchildren being killed to prevent them from taking power. And it all goes back to that one alliance, that one evil companionship. So it does matter. So if you're subject to the Lord's invitation in any way, if we need to make corrections in our soul, let's do so now while we have the opportunity as we stand and sing.